Have you ever heard a nightingale sing? The first time I heard one, I was 20. I was with my boyfriend, Christopher. We were on holiday in Italy, and we sat on this bank. There was glorious, fragrant herbs all around us, and the sun went down, and stars came out, and there were fireflies everywhere, little flashing points of light like jewels all over the landscape. It got quiet, and then there was this sound, this bird, 3 long whistles, and then a cascade, a waterfall of sound across the woodland. And it felt to me as if some door had opened from another world, a bigger, more magical world. And this sound had just leaked through. And there was just a sense of stillness and beauty and magic. Later, I said to Christopher, you know that bird that we heard singing in the darkness, was that a nightingale? Because Christopher knew about things like that. What, you mean that bird that went beep, 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 diddle, little, 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 little? Yeah, that was a nightingale. Funny old song, eh? I don't know really what all the fuss is about. Well, Christopher went off to bed, and I stood in the doorway and I looked out. And there were the fireflies, and there was the nightingale still singing in the wood. And I knew that I had fallen in love. But it wasn't with Christopher. Now, there was a time, about maybe 80, 100 years ago, when if you would walk through almost any wood in southern England in the spring at night, you would have heard a nightingale. And if you think of what people's life was like then, they would have been like the soundtrack to courtship. All those courting couples strolling through the woods at night, they would have heard nightingales. And maybe that's why there are so many poems written about them. Just Google it. Nightingale poem. It is endless. And stories and songs like this one. And if you happen to know it, do sing along. Sweetheart, say come along, come and hear the sweet song. The song of the nightingale flows. Come hear the fond tale of the sweet nightingale as she sings in the valley below. She sings in the valley below. But it's not like that anymore. You could spend your whole life living on this island and never hear a nightingale. Never have the thrill of hearing that voice lilting through the woods in the moonlight. The bulbul Asia, the nightingale that speaks, is a magical bird. A bird that lives in the land of poetry and song, of story and enchantment. Some people will tell you that it doesn't really exist. But one thing that everyone agrees about is that the bulbul Asia, the nightingale that speaks, always speaks the truth. Not the cold, hard truth of fact. The bulbul Asia speaks the truth of the heart. And this is one of his favorite stories. Once upon a time, there was a king who wanted to test the loyalty of his subjects. So he made a decree that on a certain day, a certain night, no lamp must be lit anywhere in the city. No lamp, no candle, no flame. He and his vizier, dressed in disguise as poor dervishes, went walking through the streets, looking for light. They walked along the streets, the wide streets, their feet echoing on the cobbles, for there was nobody around and no light anywhere, just the light of the stars. They walked through the marketplace, they walked up through the narrow, winding streets. And then they came to the very edge of the city, and there they saw a little shack from which came a soft orange glow. They crouched down beside it. Inside, there were 3 girls, 3 orphaned sisters, sitting around a lamp that they'd covered with a copper pot. And in that copper pot, they had drilled 3 fine holes. And in those holes, in the light from those holes, those 3 thin shafts of light, they were sewing. And as they sewed, they talked. "Well, I am going to marry the king's baker," said the oldest. "I'm going to marry the king's baker, and then I'm going to wake every morning to the smell of fresh bread." And the 3 girls felt their empty stomachs rumble. "Well, I'm going to marry the king's cook." That was the middle sister. "I'm going to marry the king's cook, and then I can eat all the leftovers from the banquet." And now their stomachs felt a little more painful. "I'm not going to marry anyone," said the youngest. "I'm not going to marry anyone unless maybe I can marry the prince. But he would have to fold my clothes up and carry them for me when I went to the hammam. And if he did that, I will bear him twins, a little boy with a curl of silver in his hair, and a little girl with a curl of silver in hers." And the 3 girls sighed. Outside, the vizier and the king smiled at each other and began to make their way back to the palace. "Will you bring those girls to me tomorrow?" said the king. "Are you going to punish them?" "Of course." When the nightingale thinks about finding a mate, he does something really quite extraordinary. The poets and the storytellers will tell you that he rests his breast against the thorn of a rose. But actually what he does is rather more amazing. For he travels nearly 4,000 miles, and he's 6 inches long, and he weighs less than an ounce. So let's go and find a nightingale. So here we are, looking for a nightingale in sub-Saharan Africa, Guinea-Bissau on the west coast. Well, to be exact, it's an archipelago of islands, 88 islands, and it is a tropical paradise. There are hippos, there are manatees, there are giant sea eagles. And if we look up into this date palm, there's a little nightingale. It's February, and so he's getting ready to fly north. And once he starts, he will fly across 9 countries, 2 continents. The Sahara Desert, the Mediterranean Sea, the English Channel, and his final destination point will be a thicket in Kent, not far from Canterbury. those 3 sisters stood trembling before the king, waiting for their punishment. The king looked at them sternly, and then he started to chuckle. So, you want to marry my baker? You want to marry my cook? You want to marry my son? The 3 girls went purple with embarrassment and felt so ashamed. Well, said the king, I think that's a very good idea. All 3 of them need wives, and why shouldn't it be you? Vizier, please go and organize 3 weddings. We could have them all on the same day. When the girls had left, the vizier turned to the king and said, I thought, Majesty, you said you were going to punish them. Yes, said the king. I just did. The nightingale rises up into the air, flies over the islands, little green patches in the sea, the blue, blue sea, ringed around with white sandy beaches. He turns to the north. Keeping the thin line between the land and the sea beneath him, he makes his way up the coast of Guinea-Bissau. He makes his way up the coast of Gambia, of Senegal, and seeing the desert there ahead of him, he sees a little oasis and circles down to rest. Those 3 sisters were so happy. They were not hungry anymore. They had a roof above them that didn't leak. They had clothes. But time passed and, well, the older 2 sisters, they were servants. The younger sister, of course, was the princess. People bowed down to her. People were always telling her how beautiful she was. And then when her belly began to swell, well, that pot of sisterly love that had been so full between them began to drip with poison. They decided to play a little joke. When the youngest sister gave birth to twins, beautiful twins, the older 2 were in attendance, and they took the 2 babies and they swapped them for a kitten and a puppy wrapped up in swaddling bands so only their little faces showed. They put the babies in the crib next to the sleeping mother, and they called the prince. Then they hid behind a curtain. In came the prince. He saw his wife sleeping and kissed her tenderly on the forehead. And then he looked in the crib. He saw little pointy teeth. He saw pink snouts and whiskers. She's given birth to creatures, to monsters, to animals. He stormed out of the room. He called his servants, said, "Take my wife to the palace of isolation. Take those creatures, get rid of them. I never want to hear this spoken of ever, ever again." The 2 sisters crept out from their hiding place. It was meant to be a joke. I know. What are we going to... I don't know. There's only... I know. Yes. They put the two babies in a basket. They brought them to the river and they dropped the basket in. It rocked and bounced and spun on the fast-flowing water, and they watched as it floated away. The Nightingale has flown up through Europe, over the English Channel, and arrived in Kent. There in the wood is the thicket, a huge mound of brambles, of dog roses, of hawthorn. He hops in. It's dark and shady and safe. There are insects everywhere. There is lots of food. And it is a labyrinth of dark, shady spaces. It's secure, and there is a place for him to make a nest. He begins to sing. During the day, nightingales sing a territorial song. As night falls, his song changes, a song designed to enchant the females from out of the sky. And it isn't very long before a little female nightingale hops into the thicket. She looks at him with her little bright eye. He looks at her. He sings a bit, and she hops a little closer. And then he begins to do his courtship dance. He lowers his head, he raises his tail and fans it out, shakes his wings and hops towards her. She hops away. He does it again, turning in the other direction. She hops away again, but not so far this time. And so it goes on until, at last, they mate. Then the female nightingale begins almost immediately to build a nest. She goes through the forest bringing back grass and twigs, and she builds low down a nest surrounded by oak leaves, and in the centre, a soft nest of moss. And then she lays 5 eggs, green, brown, almond-shaped eggs, and she sits upon them. The babies in the basket continued to rock and spin on the water until the river began to widen and the basket came to rest by the bank. Higher up the slope, there was an elderly man tending his garden, and he heard crying. He came down to the shore. "What beautiful babies are these?" He took them to his wife. "Look, my darling, babies, who do they belong to?" "My love," she said, "we have been blessed. We have been blessed in our old age." And the old couple took them in, and they loved them as their own. In the palace of isolation, the baby's mother sat. She had been crying and bewildered as they brought her to this place, and now she sat looking out at the endless horizon. As she sat watching the wind playing with little eddies of sand, something fell. A little brown bird. Its eyes were closed, but its heart was beating. She could feel through the soft feathers. She found a little shallow bowl of water and she helped it to drink, and then it hopped into the water and began to wash its wings. As night fell, it flew up to the top of the tower. And then it began to sing. And the desert was filled with sweetness. And from then on, the birds became her solace and her only company. In the wood in Kent, those eggs have hatched, and now there are 5 little open yellow mouths. And the thicket is full of wild roses and bramble blossom. And through the spring and the summer they grow and they grow. And in the house by the river, those 2 little children grew and grew and became a little boy with a curl of silver in his hair and a little girl with a curl of gold in hers. And the 2 children laughed and ran about and played in the garden by the river. At the end of the summer, the nightingales, the 5 chicks, the 2 parents, all of them made their way back, separately, independently, all the way back, across the Sahara, down through Africa, back to Guinea-Bissau. It's December. In the municipal offices, the chairman of the planning committee takes off his glasses, looks around at the assembled company. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we should be very pleased that we've made this decision. This is an excellent project. As we all know, we need industry, we need housing, and this brings us both. I know there's been some sacrifices, but I think we've made the right decision. So nothing remains really other than for me to close the meeting. The contractors are ready to start whenever we give them the go-ahead, and just to invite you all to come and have a pre-Christmas drink down at the Royal Oak. When the twins were 16, the old woman died, and not long after the old man died. And they left them the house and money to live on and told them that they must never let themselves be separated. So the twins were now fending for themselves, and they went shopping in the market. And one day while they were shopping in the market, somebody saw them. The wife of the king's baker. It must be them, she said to her sister. It must be the boy with the curl of silver, the girl with the curl of gold. Who else can it be? The following day, the twins had visitors. 2 ladies, heavily veiled, who said they came from the Benevolent Society and had come to offer some help since they'd heard that the twins had been bereaved. We don't need anything, they said. But anyway, the ladies from the Benevolent Society came inside. They walked in, they looked around. They looked around at the well-stocked library, at the music room, at the comfortable furniture. Well, you do have a very nice home. It is a very nice house, but of course it is missing something, you know, missing something essential. What is it missing? Said the twins. It is missing the bulbul Assia, of course, the nightingale that speaks. No house is a home without the bulbul Assia. Where will we find one? Oh, that is easy. The young man must go. He is a young man, of course, at the age when young men must go off on quests. He must go far away to find the bulbul Asiya. And of course, that's what happened. The boy with the curl of silver in his hair left to find the bulbul Asiya and left his sister in the care of the two ladies from the Benevolent Society. The nightingale sets off once more. The sun is setting over the sea. He navigates by the stars, up through the past the coast of Guinea-Bissau, along the coast of Gambia, of Senegal, past the city lights and the long stretches of black emptiness, and seeing a little square oasis in the middle of the desert, he circles down to rest. At the house by the river, there are tables laid out with platters of pastries, and there are glasses. The twins are having a party. The young man with the curl of silver in his hair has returned with the bulbul Asiya. When he got back, he handed his sister a wooden cage. "Is that it?" She opened the little door in the cage and it flew up to a tree above them, and they both forgot all about it. The young man had come back with such adventures. Ghouls and magicians and wonders and adventures from across strange lands, and everybody had come to hear his tales. Stories of this party had got out everywhere, and even the prince had heard. Remember him, the man who had banished his wife to the palace of isolation? He came in disguise. When all the guests were gathered, the young man stood up on a platform and he delivered his speech of wonders. And as he finished, the bird above him began to sing, and everybody was enwrapped. It was wondrous. The nightingale flies over the channel. There has been a storm. His feathers are wet. He flies straight to the thicket. It's dark, but there is light everywhere. Light and noise. He looks for the great mound of interweaving branches. He looks for the darkness and the safety. He looks for the food. He looks for the place to nest. And he finds nothing. When the bulbul Asiya had finished singing, it began to speak. It told a story. Journeys and quests crisscross the earth. Some bring joy, some bring pain, some bring death, some bring birth. 2 babies in a basket down a river did go, while their mother to the desert went in sorrow and woe. 3 sisters, 3 weddings went from joy to despair. How much may be lost if we do not take care. At this point there was a disruption as the ladies from the Benevolent Society knocked off a chair and left hastily. The prince looked at the 2 twins, the boy with the curl of silver, the girl with the curl of gold, and he remembered so long ago a conversation with his wife. "I will bear you twins," she said. And he felt overwhelmed with grief and shame. The nightingale fluttered in the arc light, singing his territorial song. He flew up to a metal fence post, and then from there to the digging machine that was still strewn with bits of the thicket that it had just dug up and taken to the skip. He flew up into the air, circled 3 times, and flew away. The following day, the prince and the twins made a journey to the Palace of Isolation. It was a long journey. They had a lot of time to talk. And when they arrived, they found the princess standing outside the tower, sheltering her eyes from the sun. She was thin and ragged. The prince threw himself down before her and begged her forgiveness. When she saw the twins, it was as if she'd suddenly woken from a dream, and they gazed at each other, they cried, they laughed, they embraced, and the prince said, "Come, let us all now go home as a family." And of course, that is where you might expect the story to end. But the Bulbul Asiya will tell you there is just a little bit more. Because what happened was that the youngest sister, the princess, led them into the dark tower and up the winding stairs until they came out at the top of the tower. And there at the top of the tower there was the most beautiful garden. "I have made this, you see," she said, "with the birds. They brought the seeds and I tended them, and now they have a place to stop as they fly across the desert. So you see, I cannot leave. For who will care for the bulbul when he flies across the desert?" And that is why the Bulbul Asiya loves this story. I mean, obviously because he stars in it, but it's not just that. This story goes from tragedy to salvation. The birds saved the princess, and the princess saved the birds. And, well, the ending of the story is really up to us. Sweetheart, don't be long, or the song will be gone. The song of the nightingale goes. Come hear the sad tale of the sweet nightingale, as he flies from the valleys we know. He flies from the valleys we know.